long term, and much of that depends on other factors, global prices, as well as government policy. But we suspect that the change in carbon emissions affected by a $30 a ton tax would mostly be gradual. They wouldn't happen in large fiction starts, with the possible exception of some things in the electricity sector, which maybe Jim will touch on in a moment. And I'll wrap it up there since I think I'm just out of time now. Yeah, go ahead.
I see this graph a lot where we talk about transportation being the biggest impact on carbon in our region because our power grid is so clean, but nationally buildings are actually the biggest impact on carbon in this country. And when we talk about our region only, we sort of ignore the fact that we could sell our clean power and offset dirty power elsewhere in the country. How do we bring that into the equation if we're just working regionally under a climate dome?
Boy, there are a whole bunch of ways to parse that question. One of the most obvious things we could do would be to join in a regional program for addressing emissions so that we can get credit for some of this stuff. You're right that we can sell our clean power elsewhere. There are a whole bunch of reasons why we don't sell more of it elsewhere. And I do think it is, there are limits, right, to how much and when we can sell our power. And it is worth thinking about the electricity sector, but I do think the point I like to underscore is in BC, Washington, Idaho, and Oregon, if we're going to reduce our emissions here locally, we're doing something different than you would want to do in the southeast, for example. We really do need to take a hard look at the transportation sector, and as a coda to that, it's also the most politically difficult sector to deal with. So we've got a tough nut to crack, and I don't want to take our eye off that ball right now.
Eric, just an observation more than a question related to your last slide. A carbon tax, I think, in terms of consumer behavior, would start to shift people's preferences. And so while you state that the short term is minimal, maybe, I can't recall exactly what the slide said. You know, over the moderate term, people start to get rid of their higher consumption, MPG vehicles and shift to volts and so on. So maybe something to add or to spin there. The consumer behavior aspect of a carbon fee.
Yeah, there's certainly a consumer behavior aspect, but this is a question that's been studied in great detail, and there's not a lot of agreement about how quickly that stuff happens. 10 cents per gallon of gasoline, the price varies about 7 cents per week. So you have to see a pretty big change before, and give us some time before it's
Yeah, I want to follow up on that. This carbon tax, you say, points out it's easier if you tax upstream, and the cap and trade involves the big guys, and the consumer behavior is somewhat indirect. Have you looked at schemes like personal carbon allowance, which is like a personalized cap and trade, which would engage individuals at a far more effective level, and reward individuals far more effectively for not using much carbon? It's more of administration, but you also have a much greater engagement, much greater reward for not using carbon.
I don't actually want to dive into that one right now, other than to say the administrative complexity of that is very significant, and I'm actually not convinced that substantial personal engagement on carbon reductions that works well for the folks who are in this room, and I'm not so sure it works well for the 6 million other people in Washington. But we should unpack that some more.
When you see the price signal.
The price signal, right, but that's communicated down quite easily from an upstream approach to capital.
Less.
In the back.
Eric, how do we deal with the fact that we have so much hydro, which is really supposedly clean, and Eastern Washington has so much untapped renewable energy potential? Would a carbon tax thrive developing in that when the PUDs out there would already say that they're using clean hydropower?
I'm going to punt that question entirely to Jim Lazar, who knows so much more about that than I do, that I would just embarrass myself. Which I'm not averse to doing, by the way. Sure, yeah, we're going to punch